Hello everyone, Sableye here and welcome back to the channel. This past weekend we had the regional championships held in San Diego, which was the first official VGC event back in the new season here in 2023. And Paldean Tauros decided to make a very large impact on this event. And today we're going to jump into as to why, because if you look at this Pokemon and you looked at some previous top cuts heading into this, you would have seen, I don't know, a few Paldean Tauros. Nothing crazy, right? But yes, it was starting to pick up in usage. But take a look at San Diego. San Diego, not only did Paldean Tauros win the tournament, Paldean Tauros, there were 12 of them in the top 32, with 4 of them advancing to the top 8. If you want to break it down to stat usage, 10 of those 32 were the water ones, and 2 of those top 32 were the fire ones, with a 3-1 split respectively in the top 8. Now, why? Why is the question as to what is Tauros doing here exactly? Because something with a Picolytic stat usage of 6% isn't that low, but it's low enough that it probably wasn't on everybody's radar. So, is it because it gets Intimidate? Because Intimidate is a fantastic ability. Yes, nobody was really using Intimidate in the meta. Arcanine was falling off. Some Salamence, of course, started picking up in usage, especially on those Palafin Rain teams. But Intimidate is still a vital ability. And I think when you play a 10-round regional, people were starting to realize, hey, Intimidate is going to be good over 10 rounds. At some point, this Intimidate is going to come in handy, right? Like, yeah, you can drop it because, like, there's not much you can do. You've got the whole clear amulet stuff. There's a bunch of Swords Dance, Goldengo, and a lot of other prominent special attackers in the meta as well. A couple Defiant users, right? It's not amazing, but it still has a place in this meta, and Intimidate is amazing. Water and fire types, right? You got the water one and the fire one, both of which come from a very limited pool of water and fire types. If I try to list fire types off the top of my head, I think Volcarona, Rotom Heat, Skeledirge, you can arguably say Arcanine, but that fell off too a little bit. So what, I just listed 4 fire types. Here's a 5th one, Tauros-Paldean. I think it should be up there. It deserves to be mentioned. And if I go water types, it's the same concept. It's Azumarill, obviously the Dondozo Tatsugiri, but I don't necessarily count that in this regard. But they are technically water types. Maybe Rotom Wash. Off the top of my head, I've got nothing. Let's take a quick look. Let's take a quick look. I don't know if I can spell water correctly, though. You'd think. Maybe Quaquaval. Maybe Okay, Palafin's really good. But, like, other than that, everything else is a super niche mon. And Tauros, with Intimidate and fighting coverage, jumps right up there to probably one of the best water types in the format. Fighting coverage. Let's not forget about the fighting coverage, because the fighting coverage is one of the key things in the meta, and why I think this Tauros has become viable all of a sudden, or why it seems like it was all of a sudden. Well, if you look a few weeks ago, there were a lot of teams with double dark types, maybe even triple dark types, right? And the fighting type coverage right here just shreds right through them. Look at something like King Gambit. Okay, it can have a Defiant boost. I don't really care. I'm going to either kill it, or it's going to Terra Flying. Or it's going to Terra Flying, and I've now forced you to use your Terra maybe in a spot where you don't want to use it, right? They now have to consider that I can just click close combat and shred it. So the fighting coverage is very important. We'll get into that a little bit later. We'll talk about the meta. But of course, on the Tauros water one, you have Aqua Jet. Priority is never a bad thing to have. Sometimes you're just going to miss that knockout. Something's going to live on a focus sash. Something's going to live on like 2 or 3%. Aqua Jet cleans things up really nicely. Of course, on the fire one, you have the Will-O-Wisp option for burning opponents. However, I do think the water one is a little bit of a better Tauros at the moment, just because I feel like right now Volcarona and Rotom Heat and Skeledirge, mainly Volcarona and Skeledirge, they have a better place in the meta than some of the other water types that Tauros is covering for. You also have the unique strategy of rocking Mirror Herb on these Pokemon. So that was like Giovanni Costa and James Evans. They had their Mirror Herb Tauros, right? And what they would do is they'd proc the Defiant boost, and then all of a sudden you'd be at +2 and they'd be at +1. So cool Defiant boost, my friend. And I don't think it's an amazing item on it, but I do think given the teams and given certain teams, I think it can definitely be used amazingly. Of course, if you go back to the Killing Water one, the Water Tauros, as I spoil the next thing, but you also have something like Killing Water, and that is 100% can't to drop the opponent's attack stat by 1. Now, yes, I know what you're saying. Tauros is a physical attacker. Killing Water is a special move. But take, for instance, something against Dondozo. You bring in Tauros into the Dondozo, you live whatever it goes for. The next turn you click Killing Water. This Dondozo, instead of being at +2 and a major threat, is now at neutral. It's not really dishing out anywhere close to as much damage as it was prior. It allows you to just sit there kind of and eventually chip it down. Start chipping away at it. And depending on what you pair it with, in this case, like Jisseok in the finals with that Baxcalibur of the water type, he had Tauros Baxcalibur and they just cycled. They cycled their Intimidates. Baxcalibur was living. It was allowing it to get those Icicle Spears into the Dragon type Dondozo. And it prevailed because it was just getting Intimidate cycled down. And that's all there really was to it. Obviously, there was no Killing Water on that variant. They just cycled the Intimidates very well. But Killing Water is definitely something that did see usage in top 32. And I do think it's something I should point out. Of course, if you're not a fan of the Raging Bull, in this case, we'll talk about the water move here. Raging Bull, it's going to destroy screens and be the type depending on the form of the Tauros. So in this case, it'll be water. On the fire one, it would be fire. But Raging Bull, it breaks screens. Grimmsnarl, it don't want to see that. And Grimmsnarl was starting to pick up in usage. Screens were starting to pick up in usage. The metagame was starting to become slower, right? Getting away from the hyper offense, trying to find ways to outbulk your opponent, started becoming popular. And Raging Bull, if they chose screens as their option to slow people down, well, I'm sorry, Raging Bull, your screens are now gone, and it's a very strong move to boot. It's not like I'm running a coverage move that just happens to be Brick Break that's already down to 75 base power. This is a 90 base power move, and it's going to be Stab on Tauros, which is very, very nice. And once again, water coverage, fire coverage, very nice. Now, if Raging Bull isn't for you, you've got Wave Crash. 120 base power move. Some of you may have seen it on Dondozo. Very, very solid water type move in the format. It's kind of like a water type Flare Blitz. Very, very strong. The only downside to it is you get the recoil damage, but I mean, it's still definitely a useful item. Now, useful move. Sorry. Now, in this scenario, you could probably just keep it. You could arguably run Raging Bull and Wave Crash on the same set, and I don't think it would be bad because some teams did use Choice Scarf, and I believe they had both. So it's not a terrible option. It does do a lot more damage than the Raging Bull. So once again, team dependent, but that is definitely a very good option. So that's kind of what these Tauroses do. Obviously, the fire one gets Raging Bull as well, gets Flare Blitz. It's the same concept. The only difference, instead of a priority move, you get Will-O-Wisp, and of course, you're a fire type. Now, where does this fit in the metagame? Okay, it's a good mon, but why is everybody using it? In this case, well, let's take a look. I know I mentioned a lot of this might feel a bit repeated, but I'm just gonna kind of tie it all in, you know? So Kingambit and other dark types, right? You've got Kingambit, Tyranitar, Lycanroc. I know Lycanroc's not a dark type, but it is a rock type, and it will go down to that close combat. Will get hit by the close combat as well. We'll get hit by the Raging Bull of the Water Tauros if that's the case as well. The Intimidate shuts both of those two down as well. It's just really, really nice for all those dark types. Hydreigon specifically, that is a top 5%. Is it still in the top 5 usage? I'm not sure if it still is after San Diego, but it's most certainly in the top 10 used mons. And it just deleting it, having a delete button for Hydreigon is amazing, just because it's a mon that doesn't go down very easily. If they want to Terra Steel, you break through that as well. If they want to Terra Water, you can if they want to Terra Fire, you can Raging Bull for it, right? You can basically deal with Hydreigon super, super well here. Once again, the fire types we were talking about, Volcarona, Skeleturge, Tauros deals with those. Now, the main thing I want to see, and the main thing I want to point out is, you know that little cheese string guy, the Goldengo? This Tauros, or any Tauros, both Tauroses I should say, pair amazingly. I think the water one a little bit better, but pair amazingly with Goldengo. And that was seen in Top Cut. 9 out of the 12 Paldean Tauros teams in Top Cut had a Goldengo on their team. Now, that's because you deal with the dark types, which Goldengo doesn't want to see. You deal with the fire types that Goldengo doesn't want to see. Steel types might resist Goldengo. Okay, I'll blow those up with my close combat. So all of a sudden, that is a very nice core in itself, and you just build around that, and the team is already going to be strong, right? Some other minor things. You've got the, of course, the mouse hold to -1, and then you just kill it in return. It's just a really good meta mon for what was available, and anytime you can deal with Volcarona, King Gambit, Hydreigon, like top 10 meta mons, you're gonna have usage, you know. And San Diego was just what showed that. San Diego said, you know what, it might not have seen a lot of usage, but it is severely being slept on, and I guess everybody was in agreement that Tauros is gonna run over San Diego, and Tauros ran over San Diego. It was as simple as that. It's a very good mon. I guess one other thing I could point out, if you use Tauros, it is technically speaking, it is a Goldengo resist. I mean, what really is a Goldengo resist, especially with, excuse me, it's questionable, or it's a little bit lower special defensive stats, so it's probably not taking it very well. But you're not gonna just straight up die, I don't think, to a big make it rain from Goldengo. So that's another nice thing, right? You can kind of safely lead it into Goldengo, not have to really worry about dying. But of course, you don't really want to be taking 92 million%, but you would be surviving, right? Like, it's still going to do a lot despite you resisting it. However, you do resist it, so technically it's a resist. And I think that's just going to be about it. But like I said, very niche metamon, but it definitely sees usage because of what the meta was shaping up into. Right? The meta was shaping up into screens. It was shaping up into slow, bulky play. Have a couple dark types on your team. They don't really have a way to really break them. But all of a sudden now you're breaking those screens. You're breaking those dark types. You're breaking that Goldengo if it tears into steel type. You break that Goldengo now too, right? Which is a really cool concept as well, right? You kill the King Gambits, which were used to deal with your Goldengo. It deserves to be in the meta. It deserves a place in the meta, and I do think it's one of the best water types in the meta. Fire type, I don't know if it's one of the best. Obviously, there's only like 5 of them, so it's probably one of the top 5 fire types. It depends. I personally am a Volcarona fan myself, but Tauros fire type is still a very solid option. Now, hey, if you wanted to be really cheeky, you can make this a fire type, but we're not going to get into the Terra typings and team building with this thing. This was more so, I wanted to keep this quick, somewhat brief, say kind of, hey, this is Tauros. This is what it's doing in the meta. This is why it did such a good job at San Diego. This is why we saw it all over the place. And I think that was kind of where we should stop and wrap this up. I don't really necessarily want to keep this on for too long. So with that, Tauros is a threat, guys. I'm gonna stop rambling right now. I will catch you all in a future video.